All right, so we're going to talk about adding value to the portrait. This is video 2 for grid drawing. I'm Mrs. Peavy, and I'll walk you through the step. All right, so this is the second step when it comes to drawing your portraits. As you notice, we have our contour lines already in place, including the contour lines inside the face. And as I had mentioned before, sometimes your contour lines can look off. Like if you're looking here at the eyes on this portrait, they don't look exactly the same. But again, we don't have value in this portrait yet to show that there's a difference in the angle that his head is turned. So if we're looking at the actual image, you'll see that there's a lot of value that tells us that this side is getting pushed back and this side is coming forward. When we talk about value and the way we deal with value, value is the lightness and darkness of a picture. When we're working with our shading and we actually use something called a grayscale, which we're going to try and practice with right now. The pressure of your pencil creates different depths of gray in order to draw. So looking at that, let's go ahead and we'll get our pencils and our erasers handy. If you have a sketching kit, they come in really handy when it comes to creating value. Even a simple one that has like just an HB being the middle territory, 5H is getting into the harder leads here. So if you have a number with the H, the higher the number, the harder the lead it is. The B's are talking about soft leads, so the higher the number in the B's, the softer the lead's going to be. If you're looking at your shading though, whenever you push harder, you're going to get more of the graphite off the pencil. If you lighten your pressure, you're going to get less. So it'll work from dark to light. Let's see what that looks like. All right, as we're here with our pencil fully sharpened, a pad of paper, let's talk a little bit about a grayscale. When we shade, it's easier if you start with your pencil held horizontally and you go back and forth. The reason I'm not just using the tip of my pencil to shade is because, honestly, the tip of your pencil creates such a different pressure where it's really, really dark that it's harder to blend the two together. So as I'm shading, this is my deep, deep, deep pressure. It's going to get lighter as I go across my page. This is what we're talking about when it comes to a grayscale. Your grayscale should have 7 different shades of gray. And the reason for it is because we're trying to create those 7 shades of gray within our portrait. So if you're looking here, here's my 1, sorry, started with 7. Really, this is 1. And this is my highest pressure and my darkest. And going this direction, this is going to be my 7. Now, it's important that as you look at the different tones of gray, that you realize most pictures have all of these shades of gray in it. So with the lightest shade of gray, you also have the least amount of pressure. So we have the least pressure, the darkest and highest pressure, and then we have all of our shades in between. So that would make this 1, 2 is about here, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7. And my 7 I could actually even get a little bit lighter, I think. Especially if I have my kneaded eraser handy, I could gum some of that off and it would make it even lighter. Now the important thing that you notice is when I'm using my shadows and value within my picture, things that are going to be a 1 that's the darkest parts, things that are going to be a 7 where they're the lightest parts. These are all really, really important because it tells us, at least that on our gradient scale, we have 7 shades of gray. 1 being the deepest shadow, 7 being a highlight. If you broke down your picture, this is what those grays look like. So you'd be looking at your grayscale and going, okay, this is a skin tone of a 7. And then if you look on your actual gradient, so it's gonna be about this gray, and it's about that gray in your black and white picture. It's important to practice a grayscale. That way you know the value that you can actually produce with just one pencil, because that was just a number 2 pencil, which is kind of a 2HB. It's in the middle ground. It has just enough graphite to produce the 7 shades of gray. So when working with value, that is super important. All right, now that we have talked about value and how to use it, you're gonna go ahead and take an eraser, and we're gonna go through and erase the grid. I know that that seems like a lot of work, but it's worth it, because now that you're gonna start shading, if you get to a 7 and your grid lines are darker than your 7, you're gonna have lines going through your people's faces. So make sure you don't skip this step and go ahead and erase. All right, now that we had erased the inside of the face, we're actually starting to add the dark shadows, which you can kind of see here. To be honest with you, I actually started videotaping this and then realized halfway through that I didn't click the record button, which is awesome because I had already done this portion of it. But we're gonna continue, and that way you guys can kind of see where I am actually shading and where I'm not. But remember, the important thing is that we're looking at our grayscale, and as a reminder, we're looking at our 1. So anything that's a 1, a deep, 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 deep shadow, this is the one we're focusing on for right now. For those of you using a regular number 2 pencil, this is a heavy pressure. For those of you using the shading pencils I gave you, your pencil, you don't have to press as hard because your lead is softer. It naturally starts to shed things, to shade things. So as you're looking at your drawing, you're really just finding the spots. So I'm looking here at the shape of this shadow. I'm placing the shadow into the drawing. I'm looking up here where this shadow is and where it falls on the hair. I'm placing it into the drawing. The bonus is I didn't erase all of my grid yet within the hair. I know that there's some lighter spaces that I'm going to have to erase it, but it allows me to start placing some of my shadows before that actually starts to happen. The blending also, I know that there are some spots that start to look a little weird because they're not attaching to another shadow. It just looks like a dark space, a dark shape, and then nothing. But eventually when we start working within those 2 to 5 range, when we talk about our grays, so when we start putting in the mid-tones here, this right here is considered your shadow. These are all mid-tones. And then this, of course, is a highlight. Once you can actually get past, once you can actually start to see these mid-tones develop, you start with your deepest shadows, you work in your mid-tones as the next step, and then at the very end, you erase in your highlights and make sure your 7s are showing. So we're working on our 1s right now. We're going through, we're kind of looking at this space right here, and we're shading it. We're looking at the shape of the shadow and then putting it in. Looking at the mouth right here is the next darkest spot. So this would be a 7 just right between the lips. So we're looking at the mouth itself, looking at where it would fall. And again, we're using the side of our pencil. This is a very narrow shadow though, so I don't need a lot of side of my pencil because it doesn't take a lot of blending. It's more of a line. And then again, your tortillon helps you shade. When you shade and blend, you need to go with the direction that the shadow would be going up the surface. So like this right here would be going up, bottom lip it would be going down. And I know right now it looks a little weird because there is no grays that are in the 3s and the 4s in it right now, but when we do put those grays in, that'll really pop. Next is this little dark shadow that's falling right under the chin. You can see this whole back area right here is actually fairly dark. So if I look at his chin, and luckily I still can see the faint lines of the grid here, I know that this is this area. It's kind of easy to just go through and start using my pencil and shading that area so that I can create the depth behind his collar, and I can push that collar forward, which is important because you really want to make sure that this color looks three-dimensional, which this line up here eventually will have to come in, if you're looking at his cheek, right about here, in order for this shadow to kind of peter out. So we want dark, dark, dark shadows here, because that's the depth of the collar. And then as we're coming around the chin, it's still kind of dark, but it's gonna kind of peter out over here into a faint line with that gray, because this eventually is getting lighter. And the pencil strokes should go in the direction of the object. I'm making it look round, so therefore my pencil marks need to be rounded. It needs to have that curve in order to guide the eye that direction. And that's kind of what you're doing, is you're going through and just looking at wherever the really dark spots are, putting them in, even the small ones, all of the 7s first. So after you get that done, we're gonna check back in and we're gonna talk about moving on to our midtones, which are our 2s through 6s.